On today's episode with special guests, we talk breastfeeding tips and history.
So excited today. We have a special guest on the couch. Woohoo! We're excited to have Milan Spencer on the couch with us today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her so you know why she is here. So, Milan is a mom of three, a fabulous mom of three, and your kids are all under the age of.
All under the age of 10.
See that
So my
part.
oldest
That
is 9.
that part right there. And then the second one is.
I have a 9-year-old, a 3-year-old, and the baby, she'll be 10 months on Sunday.
10 months. Oh
No,
my God.
go
That is
ahead.
Oh, that's
exciting.
beautiful.
And in addition to being a mom of three, she's also a public health professional for the last 14 years. Count that, 14 years. And is currently working as a perinatal health education consultant. She is in the fight against ending disparities for African American infant and maternal mortality in South Los Angeles and the South Bay area of Los Angeles. She is currently not only a lactation consultant, ding, but she's also a certified childbirth doula. So Milan is going to help us down when it comes to breastfeeding and share some truth with us. And let me tell you why I wanted her on the couch this evening, because as you guys know, the information came out last year about Black infants and how our babies are not surviving to their first birthday. And not only are they not surviving, but they're twice as likely not to make their first birthday. And one of the things that's interesting is we know that breastfeeding has a positive impact in decreasing infant mortality. So if we know that and we know infant mortality is an issue, then why aren't we doing better when it comes to our sisters? So Milan's going to help us get our minds right when it comes to breastfeeding. So Milan, help us understand this. If we know infant mortality is an issue, and we know the
Mhm.
disparity, and we know one of the connection to reducing the disparity is breastfeeding, why aren't we doing better?
Well, that several reasons. And I do want to point out that not only are our babies dying, but we're dying.
Mhm,
Yeah,
Yeah.
after childbirth, in childbirth,
mhm,
up
mhm,
to that first year, we're having a lot of health challenges. And the statistic there with Black maternal mortality is about 3 to 4 times higher, and in some areas of our country, 6 times higher.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you're
so
educated,
yeah,
five
so
times higher.
right, exactly, and it has nothing to do with socioeconomic status. It has
mhm,
nothing to do with your education level, how much money you make. We've seen the brightest, the best, the most athletic. Serena Williams have issues when she had her baby. We've seen Beyonce have issues when she's had her baby. Um, it all boils down to systemic racism. But before I get into all of that, we're
Oh,
going to
she's
talk
about to break it down. I love it.
why are we not doing better with breastfeeding. I like to start internally and then work our way out because I feel like we can have the most change starting within. So if we look to our village, um, there's a lot of things going on when we talk about our village, and I'm talking about our families, I'm talking about our partners, I'm talking about the village of grandmothers, aunts, that support system that we tend to lean on, especially when we have babies. They have a huge impact
mhm,
on our feeding choices for our children. And if the village is not on board, it's going to be so hard for mom to want to initiate breastfeeding or to sustain breastfeeding for a long period of time. So, one of the things we have to do is get our village on board. We have to start normalizing breastfeeding as the way to feed our babies. And the best way we can do that is to bring our village into this space where we educate them on breastfeeding being the best option and breastfeeding being the first option that we choose. We have to normalize that. And one of the things that we need to start doing is really changing some of our language around breastfeeding. And a lot of times when I educate, when I do breastfeeding education trainings, I talk about the language. And one of the things I tell the people that I train, stop saying, the benefits of breastfeeding. Let's start saying the risks of not breastfeeding. Like, let's start switching that, even that smallest change in our minds when we say, oh, there's a risk with not breastfeeding, that normalizes that breastfeeding is the best and normal way, and you're going to run the risk of certain things if you don't breastfeed. Okay. So even changing our language around that, when we talk about, when I see women, especially Black women, struggle with wanting to breastfeed or continuing breastfeeding, a lot of times it has to do with them not knowing or understanding that a lot of what they're dealing with in the beginning, because it's not easy, but a lot of what they're dealing with in the beginning is normal. And someone just saying, hey, it's normal for your baby to be at your breast all the time in the beginning. So when your mom is saying, you're spoiling that baby eats too much, or that baby's full, or that baby's not getting enough because the baby is always at your breast, just dispelling some of those myths, because that's a normal thing. An infant is going to do 2 to 3 things. They're going to sleep, they're going to poop and pee, and they're going to nurse. That's their that's what they're going to do. And it's normal. And so telling a mom, hey, that's normal. And in her village, if her village reinforced like this is normal, do you know how many women would continue their journey if their village was like, you got this.
Right.
We're here for you. This is what you should be doing in the middle of the night when the partner is like, babe, boo, whatever, I got you. Nurse that baby, hand him or her over. I'll burp, I'll change a diaper. That can go a long way. And I think we have to start with our village first.
And so how do we do that? How do we change the perspective and the expectation of the village? Because a lot of people, a lot of folks are about themselves nowadays. Our families aren't as community as they used to be. A lot of people live separately, sometimes for financial reasons and, relationship reasons. So how do you get people on board?
I think it has to start when whatever your conversations are in your pregnancy journey, you have to start early. And I feel like having a doula can help, or even consulting with a midwife can help. Like, these things need to be solidified during pregnancy. And a lot of if you're trying to decide how to feed your baby when that baby is out in the delivery room, it's already a little bit too late. Like, women who decide and have a desire to breastfeed, usually that's something that they decide during their pregnancy. And that's when you start bringing the village in. And that's when you start educating. And that's when you utilize your doula. Say, hey, let's sit down, come to my home. Let's sit down. Let's talk about what breastfeeding really looks like. The real, the deal, the nitty, the gritty, the bad, the ugly, the great, the wonderful. And I think a lot of times, because I've experienced it with my own family, and I've had to push back on my mom, who was like, just give that baby some formula so he can go to sleep. I've had to push back, but my pushback was rooted in education, and sometimes you have to stand firm and stand strong with family members. But even beyond that, educating them on what it looks like and educating them on how healthy it is and the benefits. That's the best thing you can do to bring your village in and support you. There's protective factors with breastfeeding. We have lower instances of ovarian cancer, lower obesity rates. Our babies are less sick. It's a wonderful thing. And so educating them on these beautiful, wonderful aspects of breastfeeding is the best thing we can do. But we have to start that when we know we're pregnant. And we don't start it when the baby's out, because everybody's tired, you tired, and
right.
Our families easily influence us, and that's not going to change. Your family wants to be
easily influences, right? You're exhausted. You're like, I'm good. Get the formula.
Right. And a lot of times, and I see with our families, they want to be involved too. And there's if you're breastfeeding, what am I supposed to do? There's so much you can do. Change a diaper, go ahead and make a meal, I used to do nurse, and nurse, pass the baby. So like I can get some time, you burp, you change diapers. Like there's so much that our village can do for us without saying, oh, I have a bottle, I want to bond with the baby, can I feed the baby? So that's another thing. Let me know when you want to get back into in the history of it though, because there's some things.
I think we should touch on it because I do think I've learned to, as a practitioner, and Olivia, you can tell me what your style of practicing is. I try to introduce breastfeeding very early. We have a lactation consultant on our team. And so I try to get, especially for new moms, they have an appointment with her before they even give birth for exactly the reason why you said. One of the things that I do get back from them is the dads who want to be involved and don't feel like they can be involved or support moms who are completely exhausted, especially moms of multiples who are up in the night breastfeeding, and then during the daytime they can't, people say nap when the kids are napping. Well, now everybody's in virtual school, ain't nobody napping, so there's no naps. So that's kind of one of my approaches, introduce breastfeeding very early. Olivia, what's your experience been like introducing it?
The population that I mostly work with, the Latinas, you don't really have to introduce much, really. It's still very much a part of the culture from what I've seen, especially the recently immigrated. With Black women, American Black women, I will say, and people who have been here for generations, I have found more resistance, especially with women who have had babies before and did not breastfeed. So when you talk to them about benefits of breastfeeding and why it's better, it's almost like admitting like maybe they love this child more, or now they're going to do better by this baby and not that baby. So there's a lot, and talking about like Milan, I'm sure I know you're going to talk about the history of it, but there's a lot of like the psychosocial stuff in there. So for the first time moms, they're like, yeah, I'm going to try, but my grandma didn't breastfeed, my mama didn't breastfeed. So the ones who've had breastfeeding in their lineage, like mama, grandma, yeah, right? But the ones that's like, you're going to go rogue and you're going to try this, they're always a little bit like, I'm going to try. But that's where I usually find the most resistance. But in my practice, we talk about it all the time. It's usually standard to start in the third trimester. I talk about it from the beginning. What are you feeling like? Where are you? Women who've had history of sexual trauma. There's some women who are like, I cannot handle the breastfeeding. And if you talk to me about all the benefits and how I'm a sucky mom because I'm not going to breastfeed, it's just going to throw me over, So moms who have babies in the NICU. So all of these like different things. But yeah, that's usually what I try to approach it. Not so much as breast is best, but kind of where are you on the whole breastfeeding spectrum? Do you even want to? And then meeting women there and giving them information that'll help them there. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. But what's really interesting is I primarily work with the Latin population too, and I have the opposite experience. So I have a lot, especially the second and third generation women. Like I have a lot of very younger. I'm part of like a pediatric practice, so I have a lot of younger women in my practice, and they're not as open to breastfeeding. And I do have to introduce, and they tend to kind of give up very quickly, and that's why we try to introduce the whole conversation early. So I have a different experience with the same population. That's interesting.
Well, it's become a thing too, like the younger generation, they don't want to destroy their body for birth at all. So there's this myth that if you pump or you don't give your baby milk, you're not going to have saggy breasts. That's a big one. Like,
yeah, we're going to talk about that whole conversation. We're going to talk about these elective injections, but that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, Milan, help us with sort of to Olivia's point, sort of the historical factor behind the breastfeeding issue for specifically Black women.
Yeah, we have a very complicated history with breastfeeding. And I'm glad Olivia mentioned like cultural, because breastfeeding has been part of our culture for centuries, okay? But there's a period of time in our history in this country where breastfeeding became violence for us. Reproductive and maternal violence. So Black enslaved women in this country were forced to be wet nurses for their white slave masters' children. And when you think about this, not only are they forced to nurse their white slave masters' children, you have to think about, in order for that mom to nurse, there's a baby that's going without, right? So they often, a slave master would line up their pregnancies with their female slaves. And once that slave gave birth, there's a Black baby there that is not being nourished by her mom. And so, and oftentimes is neglected by mom. Like, mom cannot provide any comfort, any nourishment. A lot of slave babies were given goat milk and dirty water. A lot of slave babies, Black babies who were slaves, did not survive. And so when we're talking about this history, we're talking about violence. And that type of trauma in our bloodline gets passed on from generation to generation. And you see us turning away from breastfeeding because of the trauma and the pain behind it. And like when we think about like our grandmothers and their grandmothers and their grandmothers, there was a point in time where women in our lineage turned away from something that was so painful and brought up so many bad memories. And so that's where it's gotten lost along the way. But those feelings have continued to pass down. And, you know, there are women that I counsel now. I work with a lot of Hispanic populations of women, but I also work with a lot of Black women. And sometimes like they're triggered in a certain way about breastfeeding and they don't even really know where that's coming from. And I have to explain, like, that's trauma, that's generational trauma that you're feeling, that pit in your chest, that's generational trauma. And there's been studies that have been done, and I wanted to, can I quickly read you guys something from a study?
Sure.
I wanted to read this because it kind of drives the point home. This was a peer-reviewed paper that was done in Breastfeeding Medicine called The Historical, Psychosocial, and Cultural Context of Breastfeeding in the African American Community. And I just want to read, the ideology and sentiment of breastfeeding have changed during the course of history and have evolved within the African American community. Throughout the evolution of infant feeding practices, historical aftermaths have contributed to the legacy and emotional context of infant feeding trends. The tradition of wet nursing for African American women is inherently linked to white supremacy, slavery, medical racism, and the physical, emotional, and mental abuse that enslaved African American women endured. Thus, the decision to breastfeed and the act of breastfeeding may remain deeply affected by the generational trauma of wet nursing during slavery.
Wow. You know what's interesting? I'm going to touch with Chastity on this, because thank you so much for bringing up that point, because there are people, I want to say a lot of people, but there are people who will say, that was so long ago, you know, people who want to, you know, forget slavery, but not forget other things. But they'll say that was so long ago, so many generations ago. How is it that something that happened 400 plus years ago is still affecting this generation? You know, how does generational trauma actually even work? Like, how does that impact subsequent generations?
My general idea surrounding that is, like, we pass down behavior, we pass, just like laws, the systemic racism. You want us to get over racism, but there's still a lot of systems benefiting from racism and the systemic racism that has been institutionalized into our culture, from curriculums that we all have been taught from, books that we've all have learned from. So it's institutionalized. And and to your point, Milan, when you're talking about the trauma, re-traumatization is very, very impactful in how you see yourself, learn behavior through generations, and then that in turn affects how you then treat and not treat your kid, but how you, what is the word I'm looking for? How you develop your kid. So those are generational things too. So when you're talking about breastfeeding, well, my mama didn't do it. So you don't know what you don't know, and you can't do what you've never seen. So that's when they were saying, like, representation is extremely important. So I think it's also important to be able to unlearn a lot of those. I don't want to, right now we got the information to call those unhealthy behaviors. So I want us to, I think it's important for us to unlearn some of those things that we've been, just because this generation has been in your families for years, doesn't mean that it's healthy, doesn't mean that it's beneficial. It may have gotten you over in a time where it worked and we didn't have the information to test against that. But in this moment, there's a lot of, we have a doula here, we have OBGYNs, we have midwives, a doc here. So there's a lot of information that we have at hand. And I think to your point, Milan, there's a lot of psychoeducation that has to occur. And as far as trauma is concerned, if you don't deal with your trauma, even during your pregnancy, after, your trauma will end up dealing with you.
Wow.
So you definitely, even but like Dr. Moore, you've been talking about having a birth plan, and we talked about, my contribution to that is you need to have a mental health plan when you are, even like you said, breastfeeding, that could bring up, that could be re-triggering sexual violence, rape, that those are some very, and it will impede on your ability to effectively love your child and care for your child, and to be able to see your child as your own and not something separate from you.
Wow.
So that trauma does really affect the way you, the word was parent. Y'all know I'm not no parent. I can't think of the word. It will affect the way that you parent your child.
Right.
Can I just, because that, Chastity, like that point, so the reason why this is still a thing 400 years later is because with every generation, it's passed down certain trauma that is still there. So when you think about the enslaved Black woman who could not parent her own child and could not nourish them from her body, that creates an emotional barrier there, right? That gets passed down. And so then you have the mammy, right? This figure that is this stern, heavy set woman with the big bosoms, and her sole purpose in life is to rear the white children. Okay, and so where are her Black babies? They're down to the wayside. And then from generation to generation, we have mammy being misaligned, and now it's turned into the angry Black mama who beats her kids. Like, we have all of these caricatures of Black women and Black motherhood that stem from being enslaved women in this country. And that gets passed down, and how people view us and how we view ourselves is a direct relation of that trauma. And so that's why it matters. Like Olivia said, a lot of her clients, so they see, oh, my mom breastfed me and my grandma breastfed me, but we don't see a lot of that in our, immediate families, and so that makes a difference. But why don't we see it? Because great grandma has trauma and pain, and she don't want to deal with that breastfeeding stuff because it was a time in history that we don't want to talk about, we don't want to bring back up. It was negative, and it was really traumatizing. And so we have to really start to peel back those layers and really get into the heart of it and expose it and talk about it so that we can move beyond it. Because this is what I say, we've been doing this since been doing this. Like, breastfeeding is not a white thing. It's an us thing. Okay. And we need to reclaim our position in being these incredible, beautiful creatures who bring forth life, who nourish life, who nourish our families, who nourish our children, and who rear our children. Like, we need to get back to feeling empowered in that. But when someone takes your power away, it takes generations to get that back. We're still not there.
And we really do act like slavery is that far away. It's not that far away. Generations are still alive. They're much older and they're a dying age, but they are still here, and their influence is very much present. And I like the fact that you mentioned modeling. That's something that Chastity talks about all the time, is modeling teaches us behavior, and early modeling is really, really important. But how do we practically help women to breastfeed? So Dr. Trissa, you are a career woman. What was your decision making in terms of deciding to breastfeed and handle your career? Because you're busy. So how you do that?
So for one, I knew that I was not going back to work for a while. I actually never went back to the company that I was with when I gave birth, but my choice was to breastfeed because I knew, as you put it, Milan, I knew the risk factors and I wanted to minimize the risk factors both for me and for him. But I like to think of it, at least now, then I would say I knew the benefits of, passing on immunity and just the benefits of it, period. And so I wanted to do so. However, my son just decided that he was not going to accept the breast. So I eventually did a bit more of that pumping and supplementing along with the formula. But one of the key, it's very true what you pointed out, was that there wasn't as much support in the support system. And I remember having this very good and great idea that, I was going to get my mom and all these people around to help. And it doesn't always work out that way. As a matter of fact, I've experienced it, that it really just doesn't happen that way. But I remember very specifically having to really trying to work on getting my son to take the breast, trying to calm him and get it to him. And my mom just give him formula. And I was just so upset with her because she did get breastfed. She breastfed me. Why are you telling me not to breastfeed him? Like, I was a little flabbergasted. And that's when it kind of hit me, like, it's just not going to be the same. So as much as I wanted to breastfeed him, I did not have a very long or successful journey with that because circumstances just played it out that way. But I will say I did the best that I can. I'm not a big producer. It was challenges all the way through, though he did have like a tongue tie, but it wasn't enough to truly stop him. It might have limited a bit, but he still was extending his tongue and things like that. I saw 3 different lactation consultants. And it was okay, but it was just, it was a battle of not getting the support elsewhere. And so that made it really difficult to get through anything at that point in time. But, if I have the choice, it still will be what I choose to do.
Right.
It is always my choice.
Everybody has a comment.
Listen, I got more than I thought that I could contribute. I'm over here taking notes.
Do you?
We got 10 minutes, so let's hit it up. Go ahead, because I want Milan to really share with us how we can better support women before we wrap. So go ahead, Chastity, hit your point.
My points are, and I think learning how to support women better is also empowering women to set healthy boundaries for themselves and understanding what some of these anxiety-provoking conversations, what that can do to your body and the ability for that to help you produce milk, and how anxiety and depression affects your body and your connection with your child, I think is absolutely very important. Do things you can control first and foremost. Like Trisha was saying, like, I can't do this, but I can do that. And knowing that what that is okay. And go easy, like, my word, Tasca, give yourself some grace and peace, because you got to go easy on yourself and learn boundaries, learn different ways to say no. I hear what you're saying, but that's not going to work for me and my child at this moment. If you can't respect that this is the way that I'm going to do this for my child, then we may have to limit the contact that we have with one another. Or you could just be like, no.
Right. No, you hit
something.
You hit. I love those points, Chastity. I really, really do like those points.
Y'all have me taking notes. I'm like, I can contribute.
But you hit on something that triggered a memory for me. Is that a lot of times women don't understand how even the impact of childbirth affects their ability to produce milk, and the trauma, the unexpected C-section, the emergency.
Say it, Tasca. Say it, honey. Say it.
All those things, really do impact breastfeeding. And a lot of people
diabetes.
Sometimes you have to give yourself time to recover from the trauma that happened to childbirth. And maybe we'll talk about that. We're going to have Milan back and talk about that part. And how it impacts the mom and the mom's decision to breastfeed. Before we have Milan wrap us up, Olivia, did you want something to say something in addition?
I would just amen, hallelujah, because everybody already knows my story. I had all of that, but yeah, amen, hallelujah.
Very real.
Amen, honey.
So Milan, how do we help and support sisters to be able to breastfeed? You talked about the village. Is there anything else that sisters should know that you feel we don't really talk about as much?
Yeah, I think what every sister should know going in is you have to do what's best for your body, yourself, mental, emotional, physical, and your child at every stage. And it's okay if you have to supplement. It's okay if you have to grab a bottle of formula to supplement your baby for whatever reason. That does not have to derail your breastfeeding journey. And it doesn't mean that you're not a breastfeeding mom. I've been there, and I feel like one of the things that I want everyone to take away is we have to forgive ourselves and we have to release guilt. As much as possible, we have to release guilt. And a lot of our moms, especially our mommies who are gung-ho and have the will and determination to breastfeed, when they get that bump in the road, because breastfeeding in the beginning stage is extremely difficult. And when they
Rough.
hit those bumps in the road, it's rough. A lot of times they don't continue. And the way that we can help them continue is to let them know that what they're experiencing is normal and it won't last. And I've helped many a mom who have called me in the middle of the night after they've had their babies and said, I'm going to quit and I don't want to do this. But I also know I had a conversation with that mom before this and she said, I want to do this. Help me do this. And I said, no, you're not going to quit. You're not going to quit. I'm going to talk you through it. I'm going to talk you through it and I'm going to give you some tools, because a lot of times what a mom needs is just tools to make it through the next hour and then the next
Yes.
hour after that. We have
Amen.
to take it time, okay? So we got to give our moms, give them some strategies so that they can rest. If they have to pump a little bit and rest for a couple hours for the next feeding and have somebody else handle that, it's okay to do that, okay? I tell moms all the time, we have to fight for our breastfeeding journey. If that's something you want, it's gonna be a fight. And I feel like if you have sisters behind you who you can, even if you have a partner that you can text or call and say, I'm really struggling. I've been that for people. I've been that for my girlfriends.
Wow.
We just have to be there and say, what do you need? How can I help? And you're not gonna quit and we're gonna keep doing this. Your babies just want mama. They want healthy, happy mama. However, you got to give that to them is
Say that again. Babies
yes,
want healthy, happy mamas, which means we should be focused
happy
on
mama.
caring for mama first. And if you care for mama first, baby's gonna be all right.
You'll be all right.
I love
All
that.
right.
I love that. Milan, you have been amazing on this, gosh. We're gonna talk. We're gonna
It
have
was such a pleasure. I could talk about this for hours.
Oh, don't worry.
It was such a
Don't worry, man. I'll hit you up. So
part two.
where can our moms find you? I mean, you just have a wealth of knowledge.
I can be found on all socials. I tweet, what is it? Twitter and Instagram at Milan Rouge, Umi Dula, Los Angeles. What is that? So I'm dated myself. Tweet, Twitter at Milan Rouge on Instagram. I'm usually on Instagram, Milan Spencer on Facebook. If you hit me up and say, hey, I'm a mommy, I'll add you as a friend.
Guys, reach out to her.
Yes. And if you need help with resources, I am that person. I can connect you with doulas. I connect you with lactation support. Just hit me up. Yeah.
Awesome. I appreciate you. Chastity, where can our followers find you?
At Miss._Chaz, CHAZ, on Instagram.
Dot and an underscore. Make sure y'all get it right and hit her up in her DMs. Go ahead, Dr. Trissa. Where can they find you?
At TristanJob.dpt on Instagram.
Awesome. And come on, midwife with the fabulous locks. Where can they find you?
On Instagram at This American Midwife.
And we thank you guys for following us. I'm Dr. T, the hand behind the handle of Healthy Bump Club. Definitely follow us this week. We are going to focus on breastfeeding, and we have a special surprise for you with a beautiful picture of Milan breastfeeding. She didn't think I still have it, but I have it. You want to see this picture? It is beautiful. We hope to see you there. We're going to get Milan back on the couch because we're going to talk about childbirth and all those issues. We're going to get down to the
Thank
bottom
you
of
so much
it.
for
Love
having
you.
me.
I say that one more time.
I said, thank you for having me, and I will come back anytime.
Thank you. And we see you guys next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 We love that you are a part of our community, and we want you to continue to be a part of our community. So go ahead and do what? Like the videos, hit notification, and subscribe. We appreciate you guys.